Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
How much money do you have to be considered rich? Where's the line between luxury and just regular goods? You know, if you can afford something expensive, let's say a big boat, multi-million-dollar home, should you pay more? All around the world, governments are looking for ways to increase revenues while not provoking anger from voters, so the 1% is being asked to pay more. In New York City, Zohran Mamdani wrote a populist wave of promises to make millionaires pay more right into the office of the mayor. The response from those with full wallets: hike our taxes and we are out of here. Right-wing think tanks are bursting at the seams with reports about the flight of the wealthy, pulling up stakes for sunnier tax climates and taking job creation and investment with them. Meanwhile, economists on the opposing political side see no downside to taking from those with the most cake. They're never going to miss that slice, and others are going hungry. In Toronto, Mayor Olivia Chow is proposing an increase in the land transfer tax. That's the tax that homebuyers pay when they buy a home in Toronto. The higher the price tag, the higher the tax rate. Now let me drop some facts on you. In Canada, the top 20% of households hold roughly 2/3 of the country's wealth. According to StatsCan, to qualify as a 1%er in Canada, you need an income of over $290,000 a year. By comparison, the average income in Canada in 2023 was $60,000 a year. Is this easy money for the city? I'm Alan Carter, and today on The Big Story, taxing the rich. Does it work? It's politically popular, but does it actually help smooth out wealth inequality, or is there a cost to taking more from those who have the most? My guest is Mike Moffatt, a Canadian economist, founding director of the University of Ottawa's Missing Middle Initiative, and professor of business, economics, and public policy at Ivey Business School. Mike Moffatt, always great to talk to you. Let's get right to it. Is there any evidence that increasing tax on the wealthy then drives the wealthy away?
Well, it depends on the tax and how much it is. I think when we look at something like property tax, people want to continue to live in cities like cities of Toronto. So I don't think that they're going to kind of up and leave, but it may detract some wealthier people who might consider moving to the city. They might move somewhere else. But overall, no, I'm not expecting a large exodus of wealthy people out of the city.
Well, because we've heard a lot about this when we look at New York City and Mamdani, and we also look in other jurisdictions in Europe talking about a wealth tax, and there's this pushback that says you just can't willy-nilly just raise taxes on the wealthy without some kind of consequence. I mean, is this just an easy way to pad the bottom line?
Well, again, I think it depends on what kind of tax it is. With income tax and things like that, people are a little bit more mobile. Here, you're actually taxing property, which doesn't move as much. Now, clearly, if you go too far, people will leave. But I think the city's considering doing this in part because over the last 20 years, so much of the revenue that they've generated has come from development charges on building condos, and that golden goose is cooked. So now cities are kind of scrambling, going, okay, where are we going to replace those funds from? And, it's easiest to get it from the 0.1% than it is to increase taxes on the middle class.
Well, and that's what we heard from the mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow, who broke down the numbers where it's, less than 1%. It's such a small portion of the population that we're impacting here. Are we going to see more of this as cities look for ways to get extra revenue? It's looking at the top earners and how do we get a little extra dollar out of them?
I think so. And it might be a little bit easier for the city of Toronto to do that than, kind of smaller communities where there aren't as many wealthy people and, they might consider moving somewhere else. I think the challenge is that because it's so few people, that does limit the number of dollars that this is going to raise. And, these are also tend to be politically well-connected people, so you get pushback that way. So, yeah, I'm not so worried about people leaving, but I think we need to temper our expectations on how much money that this will raise for the city.
Let's talk about luxury taxes just as a kind of idea. We've seen the federal government in Canada sort of take some luxury items off of the list, boats, for example. Meanwhile, in France, they're talking about handbags and all kinds of other luxury items, and maybe they put that on a list. I mean, what's the economics say about picking a thing and saying, that's a luxury item that we are going to increase taxes on?
Yeah, and a lot of it is kind of visual. You kind of close your eyes and go, okay, like, well, what are things that rich people buy that the rest of us don't? And you think of yachts or art or things like that. But the federal government's removal of the tax on yachts, I think, is a kind of perfect indication of some of the challenges of collecting these taxes. That first of all, it costs the federal government quite a bit of money to enforce this. You're talking about people who have pretty good tax lawyers and things like that. And secondly, it does affect people who sell these items. So the boat manufacturers were saying, like, hey, you're killing our business here. And you might start to see that in the city of Toronto, where you get people who might not, renovate their house because they're worried that it might cause their home value to exceed a certain threshold and, cause them to get dinged by a tax. So, a lot of it is these kind of games of trying to figure out, okay, how do we identify things that only rich people buy and then collect these taxes in a way that isn't too burdensome?
You got to put civil servants in place to be able to get the money. And I think that's one of the points that you've made and others have made, is that the return on this is not necessarily what you might think it is once we put all the people in place that have to collect it.
Well, absolutely. And, and as you make any kind of tax code more complicated, whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal, you need to have more people working in the tax authority. And you get into problems like we've seen with the federal government now, where you call the CRA and, nobody picks up, as the Auditor General points out. And even when they do, they give wrong advice a large portion of the time. And a lot of that is simply due to how complex the tax codes have gotten. So that does create challenges for cities that, want to be very kind of specific on how they apply those taxes. Do you have those people in place to be able to give that advice, to collect those taxes and make sure you're not screwing it up? And another example of in Toronto is when they first put in place the empty homes tax, that the first year of that collection was an absolute gong show, with 160,000 people complaining that they were improperly assessed, and over 100,000 people families getting refunds from that. So these things can be quite complicated and cause headaches for governments.
Obviously, income equality and wealth disparity is a big issue right across the world. We know that gap is getting bigger. Do you think that there's a conflating of income disparity with, tax codes? Like, do the two relate?
Yeah, absolutely. And they can relate in kind of opposite directions. That you can use the tax code to get better after tax equality, right? By having higher taxes on income earners, by trying to make that tax code progressive. But it can work in the other direction as well, that as those tax codes get more complex, that creates loopholes, that creates opportunities to structure your economic activities, to use tax lawyers in creative ways. It's something that Warren Buffett talks about, that his taxes are lower than his secretaries because he has the ability to use certain provisions in a way that the middle class doesn't. So, the tax code can be for both good and evil when it comes to equality or inequality.
And this is kind of whack-a-mole here because, Canada or the United States or any country cannot operate in a vacuum because wealth will just go to the lowest tax market somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely, and and particularly at the municipal level, where you could just drive 10 minutes and then boom, you're in a different municipality. So, yeah, absolutely, that the wealth of the 1% is very mobile. Or the 0.01% is very mobile. A lot of times they'll have homes and locations in multiple places, and if they're spending enough time in one place that's lower taxes, well, that's where their tax bill goes to. So, the ultra rich, unfortunately, do play by a different set of rules than you and I.
And this does kind of have that trickle down, vibe to it, right? The sense that, the super wealthy, they're the ones that, create wealth, they create jobs, they have investments, that all of that sort of thing. So that if you stick it to the wealthy, they'll leave and create jobs in another jurisdiction. Is there evidence behind that?
Well, it's mixed. It really depends on what the taxes are. So on the corporate tax side, I think there is some evidence of people kind of shifting their economic activities. But when it comes to other taxes, say, that the yacht tax or higher income tax, there's less evidence that changes jobs. Now, again, that might change where somebody lives 6 months out of the year and where they're paying their taxes to, but it's less kind of determinate. So, and that's that kind of whack-a-mole thing that you mentioned, that these things are so complicated. So it really depends on what tax it is, how easy is it for people to shift their economic activity. But certainly there are some taxes where it does, cause people to shift. And, I mentioned development charges earlier. That's a much smaller tax, but you see that a lot of the fastest growing communities in Ontario are just outside of our cities. Think of like Lanark County, just outside of Ottawa. And a lot of that is because the taxes are lower there. It's easier and cheaper to build, on one side of an imaginary line instead of another.
So when cities look to pad their bottom line, does it make more sense counterintuitively to lower taxes in some areas, like even perhaps for the rich?
Well, it certainly can. The details matter, but we're seeing that on the development side, for instance. For a long time we had very high taxes, property taxes and development charges disproportionately on high-rise apartments, because you're not building a high-rise apartment unless you're worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. So there was always this thought that, okay, we could, tax the heck out of these guys and, make a lot of money that way. But, what's been happening is that it's no longer kind of economical to build a lot of these buildings. And secondly, those rich people are passing those taxes along to the tenants or the condo buyers or so on. So we're seeing municipalities lower some of those property taxes or development charges to get more rental housing built. And you can look at it as a way to get more rental housing built, but you can also look at it as, hey, these are very, very rich individuals, and now you're cutting their taxes. So it really kind of illustrates the tensions that you see between the two.
And there's such political tension here, and the more you look into this, you really can, choose your own adventure. I mean, if you read the literature coming out of the Fraser Institute, it'll tell you that raising the tax on the wealthy is not a good idea. It would cut investment. Then immediately you can go to the Center for Policy Alternatives and find all kinds of information, which is 180 degrees in the other direction. Just try and close that loop for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been having these debates for well over 100 years, and it feels like nobody's really kind of changed their opinion on them. And there's a lot of motivated reasoning. And I tend to be somewhere in the center on this, that the details matter. So, I certainly believe that we need a progressive tax system, that I think it's those, at the 1% or 0.1%, whether it be income or wealth, absolutely need to be paying a disproportionate amount of tax. But there are these kind of implementation challenges, and I think there are areas where taxes are assessed in a way that does shift economic activity. And I think, a lot of times, a lot of these groups will, pick the most egregious examples on one side or other and try and turn it into a large general point.
I think, the conventional wisdom is as you're younger, you tend to be perhaps a little bit more left, and then you get older and you move slightly to the right. I mean, has your sense of this changed over time?
Yeah, I think it has, though I think it's more that, maybe now I have a gray suit and gray hair. I just see more shades of gray in this, and get kind of more lost in the details and tend to be a little less strident going, either tax the rich or don't. I was like, well, I could kind of see both sides of this. But yeah, I think, my opinions have changed and I think become more nuanced over the years. And I do think we still haven't hit it. I think one area that, I might have different views than 20 years ago is a kind of need for simplification. The sort of the recognition that, yes, it's one thing to create all these kind of nuanced policies, but at the end of the day, that does tend to advantage the people with tax lawyers. It doesn't tend to advantage the middle class.
Right. So those that can fight or can find the loopholes are going to be able to save the money at the end of the day. Can you talk about the dangers to governments to picking levels of what qualifies as luxury? I'm thinking in Toronto, for example, that the designation of a luxury home is anything over $3 million. Obviously, a $3 million home is an expensive home. But in Toronto, I mean, that yardstick moves, and once the government says 3 million is luxury, they're unlikely to change that.
Well, absolutely. There's a prime example of this, that there's a GST rebate on new housing that has existed since 1991. And you're no longer eligible for that rebate if you buy a luxury home, which in the tax code is considered to be over $450,000. It has not changed since 1991. And I defy anyone to find a new home in the city of Toronto that's under $450,000, like 100% of homes are. So that's a real problem. That first of all, you have to identify, make some kind of arbitrary cutoff point saying, okay, this is luxury and this isn't. But then recognize that changes over time as income changes and technology changes and so on. Growing up, I thought anything more than a 19-inch TV and a VCR was luxury, and now we've got everybody's got 40, 50-inch flat screens, right? So things change, and I find that technologies and incomes change faster than government regulations in the tax code.
I mean, I think of the Sunshine List here in Ontario, which when it first came out, it details any civil servant that makes over $100,000 a year. And when it was first introduced, $100K a year was very significant. It's still a lot of money for a lot of people, but it is not the excessive amount that it once was. It's almost as if the government it's like, wow, we'll just let this become meaningless, just like the tax that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when that came out, it used to be a handful of university professors and people who ran hospitals, and now it's teachers and police officers and nurses and all kinds of government employees. So yeah, that's another great example where governments set up a rule that might, or a cutoff point that might make sense at the time, but fail to change it in the face of changing economic conditions.
I'm disappointed you're not wearing a Eat the Rich T-shirt. There's so much sloganeering in all of this, is there not? I mean, really, if you're looking for a political whipping boy, the rich, they do very well.
Yeah, no, they absolutely do, and it's understandable why. And we have, to be fair, like we have seen increased income inequality over the last 50, 60 years. So people who kind of point out that the 1% or the 0.1% has kind of pulled away from everybody else, they're not wrong. So, absolutely, it's, we need to look at them to contribute more. But at the same time, I think we have to look at why isn't it that the rest of us aren't, seeing our wells and incomes increase at the same rate, and, make those kind of economic changes. Look at, why is it that, I could buy a house 20 years ago in London, Ontario for, twice my wife's and I's income, and now, my kids are never going to be able to afford a home, unless they inherit one. So, I think we have to look at these things across the board. And yeah, rich people have pulled away from the rest of us, and that does cause understandable resentment. But, I think we need to take a more holistic view.
A balanced approach. How academic of you, Mike. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you talking about it, Mike.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in this conversation. Send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. Reach us on Instagram @FrequencyPods or on Blue Sky @TheBigStory. If you know someone who might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. I'm Alan Carter. Thanks for listening.